It has been said that the Pac-12 is falling further and further behind. Why is that? Less money spent on football, poor commissioner leading the Pac-12. What would it take to bring the Pac-12 to a better standing in the eyes of college football? Plus, I think a West Coast person on your pod would bring better dimension and understanding to the pod.
Giving a crap would probably be the best thing the Pac-12 can do. Because, I mean, if you look at the way conferences approach sports, like the SEC has always been a football conference. Football was more important than anything else. It was culture-wise in the area, high school football, junior high football, pee-wee football. Football is what's mattered. Football in the Texas, in those areas, in the Big 12. That's what it was all about growing up. So their colleges reflect that. They care about football. That's why they became so good at football. The Big Ten cares about football and basketball. But if you look at the SEC in recent years, a conference that had devoted so much of its resources, nearly all of it, to its football programs, suddenly with the advent of the SEC network and all this new television money, said, well, we can't just build $70 billion athletic facilities everywhere. We've got this money. We've got to be something to do with it. What if we started caring about basketball too?
Let's go hire some good basketball coaches and let's start to like raise the level around here.
And now you look at the SEC basketball and hey, it's not just Kentucky anymore. There's a lot of Alabama's in the top 10 for basketball too. So the Pac-12, if you look at how it is compared, football on the West Coast has just never been what it is in the Southeast or what it is in the Midwest. And if the Pac-12 wants to catch up to the other Power 5 conferences, it needs to take that money that it has and start funneling it towards football first, football second, football third. And that would kill a lot of the other success, or at least greatly even out the playing field that the Pac-12 has experienced in other Olympic sports. And I'm not sure that the Pac-12 wants to do that, nor am I sure that the Pac-12 should want to do that. I just think that if whoever the Pac-12 brings in as the new commissioner, if their goal is truly to be an elite Power 5 football conference, that is the first step that they have to take. I don't know that they will. I don't know that they have to. I just know that as a college football podcast and as college football writers and college football fans who approach it from a college football standpoint, I think we would like to see the Pac-12 take that step. But again, I can't tell them what's right for them.
They do need USC to get back on top. We don't need the whole league to get fixed. It's almost like a baseball lineup, right? If you got a really good number 3 hitter, then you got a decent 4 hitter. But if you got to move that 4 hitter to the 3 spot and then your 6th guy becomes your 5, like if you have Oregon as your number 2 team in the conference behind a USC that's really cooking, that's a pretty good looking league. And then they're like, yeah, Utah or Washington or Arizona State, that's a pretty nice 3 or 4 or 5. The issue is when you don't have that top team that plays at that kind of top 5 level, then everybody else like, yeah, they got some parity, got some depth. They're kind of out of the conversation. The league's not taken quite as seriously, but like, I think most of their fans, they just don't have it. They don't have as many just absolute people who are living and dying with the success and the news of their team on a daily basis.
It's absolutely annoying to me that this is the case. Like it drives me nuts. Like I wish, and you are 100% right, Bud, because what's the difference success-wise with the Pac-12 and the ACC, or some years the Pac-12 and the Big 12, if you take out Oklahoma or you take out Clemson, and especially some years are better than others, some years are worse than others. But a couple of years ago, I mean, it was Clemson, and there still is a dramatic drop off. But at least we have North Carolina getting better. At least there's some Miami's kind of getting back on track. That if they could get USC back on track, would it be that simple? The fan thing it's perplexing to me because there are some great, maybe it's because they're not in college towns. I mean, college football is unique because you have to travel to get there. You have to fly to a big airport, Atlanta, and then you drive a couple hours to the middle of nowhere. Big 12, you got to fly to Oklahoma City and then you drive a couple hours. It's unique to get to some of these locations. Pac-12 is a lot of major cities where you kind of get buried in a Seattle, in a Los Angeles, in a Denver, in a Phoenix. And granted, they're all, a little bit further, but they're not separate. You still have major sports leagues that it's expensive. If you live in Alabama, you're going to be an Alabama or Auburn fan because you don't have the Rams or the, another team to root for. And that's just football. We're not talking about NBA and baseball and other professional sports leagues. So I don't know if that's what explains it, but it's very and having covered it and having been there, the best example I can give is I covered a Mississippi State game. This was before Dak was there. They were okay. I think they were playing Arkansas, and it was in Starkville. And I get there, and they were both again, I got the lower tier games at ESPN early in my career. And I got to the stadium, and I was even blown away at the tailgating scene. I'm like, what is going on? Is it home? Is it parents' weekend? Is it homecoming? They're like, nope, just a game. I'm like, all right, it's an experience. Then, I had a Friday night game at Stanford where they were playing Washington State. Washington State was a top 25 team. Stanford had a pretty good, I think it was like a 3-point spread. They were both pretty good teams, and it was empty at kickoff. And I'm looking around. I was giving Dave Fleming my broadcast. He went to Stanford, and he was telling me how great Stanford is. And he was warning me before the game. He's like, hey, and I'm like wearing him out. I'm like, how are you ever going to be taken seriously if you've got a game like this and nobody's here? And he kept, well, the traffic in Northern California is really bad. I'm like, well, that doesn't explain 300 people here at kickoff. It's just, you see, and that's just one example, and there's some great places.
Sucks too.
What's that?
I said traffic in Atlanta sucks too. Yes, from back in
exactly.
The championship.
Exactly. And there's some great experiences in the Pac. Corvallis, I've been there, and it's great. And there are some great fans. I wish they didn't all get bundled up in this Pac-12 doesn't care, but it's the reality of the situation. You can't replicate that. All this tradition that takes place with the tailgating in the SEC, this is decades, 40, 50, 60 years in the making, where you grow up going to these games and experiencing these things. And I don't know if you can just ingrain that in a conference.
Yeah. And to touch the point of professional teams, I'm not sure that's it either, because if we just look in our lifetimes, how many NFL teams have moved to Los Angeles and then left Los Angeles and then moved back to, what I mean? My wife spent a good 15 years living in Southern California. She's up and she was up and down the West Coast for work. And the way that she sees she's explained it to me, is that it's just not that important there. She says, when USC was good during the dynasty years, people paid attention to it because it was cool, because, that's kind of just the way, especially in Southern California, it works. The people in the area are attracted to whatever the cool thing is at the time. And when you're winning is cool. So she's like, while there are certainly diehard fans of every single professional sports team, it's just the way sports are approached. Having grown up here in Chicago, living in Washington, D.C., and living on the West Coast for work, she says sports are just treated entirely differently on the West Coast than they are everywhere else she's ever been. She says, even if you just listen to the sports radio, it's two completely different animals in the way that people, and when you think of sports radio, nobody who's listening to sports radio isn't a diehard sports fan. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And she says, even the sports radio on the West Coast is still more laid back than what you experience in Chicago, or you would experience with the Feinbaum set. Although I don't think Feinbaum is anything we should, do generally. So I just think that it's a cultural and a lifestyle thing where, yeah, they like sports, but it's not that important to them.
It just doesn't mean as much. That should be their slogan.
It just means more. We'll see if my plans get canceled. If the hike doesn't work out, then we'll go and check it out. I mean, I've got some peers who I would say probably as adults have a Pac-12 approach to following North Carolina, classmates that they're more concerned with their bike rides and their family activities or whatever. And they might not know, they might not be able to name somebody on the offense beyond Sam Howell, right? And they are not the ones that are downloading this podcast every single day and making it, as you mentioned, Bud, part of their self-worth. I'm glad that we mentioned Corvallis. I'm glad that we mentioned Pullman, Eugene. There are awesome hotbed college town communities within the Pac-12. But Bud, as you hit on earlier, I just think of it from the working at CBS since 2010, reading traffic reports, getting these lists where it's like, these are the 25 teams that draw the most interest. And that list of teams does not include what I cannot say off the top of my head whether it's one or two, but the representation overwhelmingly slants towards the SEC and towards the Big Ten. And I think that that's why you start to see some of the coverage and some of the general conversation sort of backs that up. So will be interesting. Like, I would love, as you mentioned, Tom, I would love to be able to see USC charge back, to have Oregon at the top of the game. I promise you, I'm watching. Like, whether the Pac-12 stinks or not, I'm watching. You know, we got locks on it. We are going to be dialed into the Beavs and what Jonathan Smith has going into next season. That's just who we are because we're college football degenerates.
We're more fervent Pac-12 fans than most of the people who went to the Pac-12 schools.
Yes.